Julius Caesar. It is late morning in Rome, the Ides of March, 44 before the Common Era. Julius Caesar, 55 years old, dictator perpetuo, strides toward the Senate meeting held in Pompey's theater complex. He is a man whose power has outgrown the building he walks into. Victorious in Gaul, triumphant in civil war, now draped in honors that look like a crown no one is allowed to name. The chamber smells of wax and oil. Sunlight angles through the high windows, catching motes of dust that hang above the senators' heads like a bad omen. He has ignored the haruspices and Calpurnia's dream because a more persuasive voice, Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, trusted ally, has told him to come and face rumors like a man. Picture the room. Senators in white, rings flashing, daggers hidden in folds of wool. He approaches the dais. Tullius Cimber kneels and thrusts up a petition for his brother's recall. Caesar tips his chin away, irritated. Cimber's fingers clamp the toga's edge and yank it down hard off Caesar's shoulders. That one motion detaches ceremony from murder. Publius Servilius Casca slides behind, steel low and tight, and strikes up into flesh just under the left shoulder blade. Caesar's body flinches, a shocked animal sound in his throat. He twists, clamps Casca's forearm, hisses in Greek. This is violence. The sound of blades unsheathing blends with wool tearing. Cassius drives a blade toward the ribs. More hands are on him now. Some slashing, some stabbing, a frenzy dressed as principal. Sandals skid on wet stone. Iron stings the air. Blood mists, spots a senator's cheek. He wipes it away without thinking. Caesar stumbles backward into the base of Pompey's statue, his palms sliding down marble that will soon be streaked in his blood. He drags the toga edge up to cover his head, one last Roman gesture for dignity, and the knives keep working. 23 wounds, says Suetonius, only 1 or 2 mortal. Picture the last thing he feels. Cold stone on his shoulder, the heavy drag of fabric in his fingers, breath turning shallow and wet as the wool fills with heat. He dies under Pompey's statue, in a hall borrowed from his rival, killed by men who wanted history to call them saviors. Not et tu, Brute. That comfort is Shakespeare's. The ancient sources remember either a Greek exclamation or silence. They scatter. The body lies on the tiles, leaking into joints between stones until attendants carry it home. Days later, Antony displays the rent, blood-stiffened toga, and reads the will. 300 sesterces for every citizen, public gardens gifted for all, and the crowd turns. A pyre blows up in the forum, benches and spear shafts feeding it, the heat blistering faces as men and women howl for revenge, hurling whatever they can lift onto the fire. Here's what makes this worse. The murder meant to restore the Republic becomes the proof that the Republic cannot save itself. Within a generation, the city accepts an emperor by another name, and the statue that caught Caesar's blood keeps standing as if it never learned what it witnessed. Caligula, January 24, 41 of the Common Era. The Palatine hums with applause after a performance. Gaius Caesar Caligula, 28 years old, adored, feared, rumored into monstrosity, steps into a narrow-covered passage beside the palace theater. The air is warm with lamp smoke and trampled perfume. The men in this corridor are his guard, the Praetorians. They know his gait, the hitch in his shoulder, the familiar smirk. One of them, Cassius Chaerea, a tribune he has mocked with obscene passwords, waits in the half-dark. Caligula moves with the lazy arrogance of someone who thinks he has time. Chaerea steps into his path and asks for the day's password. An old ritual turned wrong. Caligula's mouth opens for a joke he will not finish. Steel kisses skin. The first thrust lands high, in shoulder or neck, depending on which hostile witness you believe, and the emperor's breath becomes a wet, surprised sound. A second blade opens his chest. His hand flails for the wound, slides on his own blood. His courtiers evaporate like mist when wind hits it. Short swords and knives, edges honed for duty, strike him in thighs, belly, ribs. He staggers, tangles in his cloak. The corridor echoes each scrape of sandal on stone, each gasp, each grunt. Suetonius, never shy, will claim 30 wounds. It is over fast, and not fast at all. Time stretches between the first knife and the last. Long enough for fear to bloom. Long enough for him to understand who is holding him down and why. He dies not on a battlefield or a blood-slick stage before a cheering mob, but in a service hallway. The Emperor of Rome crushed between the walls by the men paid to protect him. The irony is a knife edge by itself. Mock a soldier often enough, and his laugh turns into a thrust. Outside, the palace becomes a butcher's yard. His wife, Caesonia, is cut down. His infant daughter's skull is smashed against a wall. This detail is whispered more than recorded, but it sits behind the sources like a stain they cannot scrub out. Senators rush to declare the Republic reborn, only for a squad to yank a trembling Uncle Claudius out from behind a curtain in a storeroom and hoist him as their choice. Here's what makes this worse. The guard learns in one afternoon that the quickest way to a bonus is through an emperor's body. A procedure has been invented. The corridor keeps its secrets. The frescoes dry again. The blood fades from the floor faster than the new price list for loyalty. Nero, June 9, 68 of the Common Era. Rome has turned its face away. The Senate declares Nero a public enemy. The Praetorians choose their pay over his songs. He flees the Palatine by night with a handful of freedmen, Phaon, Epaphroditus, and a name he cannot outrun. They move through gardens, down lanes, out into the countryside, toward a villa off the Via Salaria, slipping into reeds to avoid patrols, the emperor hiding his profile under a hood like a thief. Dawn bruises the sky gray. Inside the villa, the walls sweat damp, plaster flakes under fingertips. Nero asks for a grave to be dug in advance. He asks for water. He asks for poison, then discards it. He handles 2 daggers, testing their points the way you test a thought. Hoofbeats on the road. A courier's news rips whatever thread he had left. Condemned by decree, to be dragged naked and beaten to death with rods if captured. The old punishment no one remembers until they need to terrify a man into choosing his own end. What an artist dies with me, he says, and it is not a boast now, but a plea to have this moment recorded. He puts the blade to his throat and cannot press. Epaphroditus steps behind him, braces his back, and together they drive it in. The pain is white, immediate, instructional. His hands flare open, then clamp around steel, slick with his blood. He breathes and chokes on iron. A soldier forces the door. For a heartbeat, there is the absurd possibility of rescue from the very instrument meant to arrest him. He is already leaving. The straw stinks of mold and animals. The room smells of oil and fear. The floor is gritty against his heel as his body loosens its last hold. He dies on a pallet in a cheap suburban room, the emperor who staged spectacles unable to find an audience for his final act. The irony cuts. The self-anointed artist needs someone else's hand to make his exit, and even then it is messy, scared, undignified. Acte, the freed woman who loved him once, and his wet nurse handle the cremation. They gather the remains and secure his ashes in the Domitii tomb. Rome starts rumors that he never died, that he will return, because a story like his does not like an ending this small. Here's what makes this worse. His death is not a full stop, but a trigger. Within days, armies march. The year of the 4 emperors opens like a wound, and the city learns to live on a diet of proclamations and ash. Commodus, December 31, 192 of the Common Era. Steam breathes from the bathhouse. Commodus, 31, son of Marcus Aurelius, oiled like a statue and as convinced of his own divine muscle, plans to appear the next day as a gladiator in public office, a humiliation for senators already sick with his games. In quiet corners, his inner ring moves. Marcia pours poison into spiced wine. The prefect Latus nods. The chamberlain Eclectus watches the door. Commodus drinks, retches, survives. They need hands now, not chemistry. Enter Narcissus, the wrestler, summoned as if to help the emperor stretch. The air in the bath is cedar and wet heat. Commodus hunches on a bench, abdomen clenched with cramps from the failed poison. Narcissus kneels behind him in a gesture that could read as service. A towel loops, smooth and white, then bites. He hauls back with a professional's economy. Commodus explodes into motion, feet scrabbling, heels smashing, a bronze basin that rings the room like a struck bell. Fingers claw at the towel, slide off. His face congests purple, the whites of his eyes spiderweb. Narcissus leans in, forearms like ropes, and tightens. There is a sound human bodies make when oxygen says goodbye. It is not a roar or a scream, but a hissing collapse. The emperor's weight gives. The towel relaxes, then is pulled one last time to be sure. He dies in steam, strangled by a prop as workmanlike as any he ever used to humiliate others in the arena. The private spectacle buries the public one he wanted for the new year. They wrap the body, whisper the plan, stall the city with a fiction of illness until a successor can stand where he will never stand again. The Senate damns his memory, orders statues toppled, spits righteous words, now that the dangerous part is over. Here's what makes this worse. The solution becomes a precedent. Pertinax rises and is murdered by the same guard in weeks. The throne will be auctioned like a horse, and the habit formed in steam spreads through camps and provinces. A practical lesson taught with a towel. If you cannot live with him, he can be stopped. Caracalla, April 8, 217 of the Common Era. A road in Mesopotamia, near Kare, the wind moving grit along the verges, the column halting by a roadside shrine. Caracalla, 29. A soldier who kills his brother Geta in their mother's arms and later grants citizenship to millions, dismounts to relieve himself. His guard hangs back out of etiquette. The Praetorian prefect, Macrinus, hums with fear he cannot shake. Intercepted letters hint that his head is next, and fear has already found the man willing to relieve it. Julius Martialis, a soldier with a grudge sharp enough to cut through duty. The emperor steps a few paces toward the rough latrine, cloak pushed back, hands occupied in the most ordinary human act. Martialis approaches as if to attend. The Pugio slides free with the faintest hiss. He drives it into the emperor's left flank just below the ribs, angling up, a practiced motion to find organs through muscle. Caracalla jerks, eyes wide, face blank with surprise that hardens into rage. He wheels, hand reaching back for the knife, but Martialis rips it free. Hot blood pours into the emperor's boot. A guard javelin answers the crime, hurling through Martialis's back and out his chest. The assassin falls at the emperor's feet. Caracalla's strength leaves him in a wash. He sinks to one knee in dust that sticks to blood, vision turning to a narrow stripe of pale sky. The men around him are shouting. The shrine stones do not care. The wind smears dust into the wounds and does not care either. This is how it ends for a soldier king. Not on a parade ground with lines perfectly dressed, not in a tent with banners and standards, but alone on the side of a road with his tunic loose, killed while urinating by a common soldier. He does not see until the hurt begins. The irony is savage in its ordinariness. The next day, the army proclaims Macrinus emperor, the first equestrian to seize the purple, a promotion written in someone else's blood. Caracalla's ashes will be sent to Rome and placed in Hadrian's mausoleum. His statues will remain to look down on men who no longer serve him. Here's what makes this worse. The Constitutio Antoniniana, the citizenship grant he issued, becomes a ghost at the scene. Millions get a paper belonging, and one citizen with a small blade writes the law's truest limit into his body. Titles do not protect you when the man close enough to touch you stops wanting you alive. Elagabalus, March 11, 222. The Praetorian camp smells like leather, sweat, and sour wine left too long in the Sunday. Elagabalus 18, high priest turned emperor, perfumed, painted, and determined to reorder Rome's gods, walks into a space that doesn't believe in his kind of divinity. His grandmother has already shifted the winds. His cousin, Severus Alexander, younger and easier, stands nearby in a soldier's plain cloak. The guard chants a name that is not his. He feels the temperature of the room change and moves the way prey moves when it realizes the pack just decided the law. He turns toward the latrines, toward any door that looks like a door. Hands catch his hair and robe and pull him into the open. His mother, Julia Soamius, clings and shrieks and becomes a handle the soldiers use to keep him still. Knives come in short and fast, the way barracks knives always do. Into the belly to buckle him, into the thighs to take away his legs, into the chest to make breath a terror. Someone stamps on his jaw. Teeth chip. Blood and perfume and sewage make a smell that will cling to the men who do this longer than they think. The blade work gets sloppy because anger always ruins technique in the second minute. A sword takes his head almost clean. They finish the job with sawing because bone is harder than stories make it. Per Dio and Herodian, some soldier hacks at his genitals in a grim little flourish, the sources preserve like a trophy, because humiliation is part of the ritual. A hook goes through meat, and the headless body becomes freight, dragged over paving stones, leaving a red track that the city will step around until rain can pretend to wash it away. He dies in filth, the living god of a black stone reduced to meat at the edge of a drain. The irony is architectural. He tried to rebuild the sacred order and ends up as sewage. His head is paraded like a solution. The corpse is flung into the Tiber, the final Roman insult for people you want the river to forget. Alexander is lifted onto the shield, and the public breathes relief, not because they are kind, but because order is a narcotic. Here's what makes this worse. The barracks learns to perform desecration as civic service. The guards' ritual is now complete: select, slaughter, display, erase, and citizens watch it like weather, as if it just happens to them and did not require their silence to function. Valens, August 9, 378. Thrace bakes under a hard sky. Valens, near 50, emperor of the East, rides out to meet Goths who crossed the Danube as refugees and became rebels when Roman officials starved and extorted them. His scouts are wrong. His allies are late. The heat presses through armor into lungs that are already dry. Gothic wagons form a ring. Horsemen are dust on the horizon. He commits because emperors who wait get called cowards and then die later anyway. The first shock hits the Roman left like a wall moving sideways. Cavalry pours in, lines bend. Command dissolves into men trying to keep the person next to them from becoming a whole. Arrows arc and rattle into shields. The sound is a hailstorm on wood and skin. Valens rides, points, shouts orders that only some men hear. Somebody's spearhead finds him arrow, javelin. No one will agree, and his body understands before the report reaches his head that something important is now leaking inside him. He pulls back with the guard, a cluster of men and flags, looking for a shape on the ground that can be defended. A farmhouse appears, a stub of walls and a roof that promises shade. They crowd in. The door is barricaded with furniture that never expected to keep emperors alive. Outside, Goths pile brush. Smoke fingers into the gaps first, exploratory, curious. Then it billows, greasy and black with whatever the farmhouse kept in its rafters: oils, tallow, old life. Inside, the heat climbs and stays. Leather sizzles, hair singes, men cough until coughing fails as a strategy. The air itself becomes the weapon, stripping lungs with every breath. Some rush the door and meet spears. Others press faces to the floor where the air is thinner, buying seconds at the price of splinters in the lips. Roof beams complain and then give. The last sensation is light turning orange behind your eyelids and the weight of timber that remembers trees. He dies in a peasant shed, an emperor whose empire could move armies across continents but could not get him a canteen of water and a plan. The irony is that a crisis of administration greed and incompetence with food lists and bribe schedules killed more efficiently than any Gothic blade. They cannot find his body afterward. The rumor that he burned to ash pleases the Goths because it is salt in a wound they have licked for 2 years. Here's what makes this worse. Adrianople doesn't just kill men. It kills the habit of imagining barbarians only as enemies outside the line. From now on, the empire will negotiate with armed foreigners inside the map, and the map will learn to blur while telling itself it remains sharp. Maurice, November 27, 602. The Marmara wind is a knife. Maurice, 60-ish, frugal, capable, one of the few who could both count and command, stands on a pebble beach in Chalcedon with his sons lined up in front of him. He has fled Constantinople. The blues and greens picked a new favorite. The army he saved mutinied because he told them to winter on the far bank of a cold river to save the treasury. Phocas, a centurion with luck and timing, rides the wave of everyone's anger and now sends men to finish what policy started. The boys kneel because someone tells them to. An officer reads charges in a voice trying to sound official. The words are excuses for a knife. Maurice kisses each forehead. The swords go to work with the efficiency of men doing something they tell themselves is necessary. Necks open. Blood steams in cold air. The smell of iron rides the wind into the city where someone is already polishing the new emperor's boots. Maurice prays. The words are old and do nothing practical but make a line between this and chaos. The last boy shakes. The steel hits vertebra with a jar that runs through a swordsman's shoulder to his jaw. They force Maurice down. The blade bites. Salty air, cold pebbles, heat at the neck, the sensation of falling without moving. This is what an emperor's last seconds feel like when numbers were your weapon and numbers failed you. He dies as proof that thrift is an obscenity to people who think comfort is a right. The irony is domestic. The man who preserved the state by refusing to buy momentary love with money is killed because he did not buy momentary love with money. Phocas parades through the hippodrome in a victory that smells like smoke and cheap wine. Maurice's head is displayed, some bodies tossed to the sea. The capital decides it all makes sense because the city prefers a story to a fact. Here's what makes this worse. Across the border, Khosrow II, who owes his throne to Maurice, points and declares a holy war to avenge a friend. Persia's army rolls like a dark tide. And within years, the empire Maurice saved is a strip of walls and stubbornness. A beach execution becomes the lever for a war that will leave cities empty and churches rich in prayers and poor in people. Emperor Yang of Sui, April 11 or 12, 618. Jiangdu Yangzhou under lantern light. Emperor Yang of Sui, 49, builder of the Grand Canal, breaker of backs to pay for it, retreating into gardens and painted pavilions while his realm burns. The Xiaoguo army guards his sleep because names say they do. In a corridor, Yuan Huaji adjusts his armor and decides this night belongs to him. Shouting wakes the palace like a whip. Fire is a useful word when you want everyone to run to the wrong place. Yang appears with hair unbound, robe loose, trying to assemble authority from habit. Commands bounce off men who have already moved on. He asks for wine to make this human. They give him a cord to make it neat. Two soldiers loop thick silk under his jaw and cross it at his throat. One braces a foot between his shoulder blades. They pull. At first it is only pressure, like an unwelcome hand. Then it is fire where skin burns under the strangling line. Veins swell and burst red into the whites of his eyes. Tongue protrudes. The body does its last humiliations because bodies do not care about rank. The ceiling's painted dragons look down. Their mouths are always open and they never breathe. He dies without blood because blood stains. That is the point. The emperor who moved rivers with orders is moved out of the way by a velvet rope. The body is set aside. The palace returns to inventory. Jewels, silks, women, anything that can be counted and carried. Princes and ministers die in batches. Yuan tries a puppet. The dynasty collapses like bad scaffolding anyway. Li Yuan will turn Tang into a word that tastes like golden age, while corpses from the last months of Sui feed the new order's roots. Here's what makes this worse. The canal he cut through the land like a scar will outlive him by 1,000 years and be called a feat. And the men who died to dredge it, the ones who watched their emperor's face turn plum in a quiet hall, will be remembered only as a statistic. Velvet won because it didn't splash. Maximilian I of Mexico, June 19, 1867. Querétaro, the hill called Cerro de las Campanas, morning bright and brittle. Maximilian, 34, Habsburg Archduke made Emperor of Mexico by French ambition and Mexican conservatives, stands with generals Miramon and Mejia against a whitewashed wall. Napoleon III took his army home. Benito Juarez did not. Betrayal opened a gate and exhausted men rushed through. A court-martial wrote the last paragraph because the law has to be there to make this feel like more than revenge. He looks like a picture because pictures will be taken. Black frock coat, decorations pinned like arguments. He gives coins to the firing squad and asks them to aim at the chest so his face remains a face for someone to kiss goodbye later. He trades places with Miramon so the general can die in front of his own men. This is theater with a heart, or habit, or both. He refuses a blindfold. He says words about forgiveness and Mexico that will read well in newspapers eager to make sense of the world. Rifles come up, 12 muzzles, a dozen paces away. Black mouths, impatient. The command snaps. The volley hits with thuds that sound like sacks of grain hitting a table, except the sacks are organs. He folds, then tries to be upright because people who practice posture cannot help themselves. The coup de grace is a pistol placed where accuracy lives, and then there is no more emperor to aim at. He dies under a law designed for foreign invaders and traitors, and the irony is that his tenderness and his delusions about enlightened monarchy both brought him to this wall. The body is embalmed badly. The trip home is a failure in chemistry. He arrives in Vienna darker than memory prefers. Juarez consolidates a republic with the clean punctuation of a shot, and Europe shrugs because it has other pictures to look at. Here's what makes this worse. The cameras make this execution modern in a way Rome would have recognized images to do the work that roads of crosses once did. The white wall becomes an altar. People visit and feel something like pride or grief or closure. The men who pulled triggers go home to lunches that taste of dust and something else they don't name. Notice the pattern that does not care about time. A Senate corridor, a barracks drain, a peasant barn, a beach, a painted hall, a white wall. Spaces change, the instrument set evolves, but the composition stays in the same key. Guards become executioners the moment pay, pride, or fear crosses an invisible line. Rituals learn how to keep carpets clean while throats close. Laws learn how to make murder sound like maintenance. Crowds learn how to watch. The bodies teach the lesson institutions want taught. This is what happens to the one at the center when the circle tightens. And here's what makes it worst of all. None of it solves the problem it claims to solve. Caesar's knives write Augustus, not liberty. The towel buys an auction. The roadside blade buys a brief promotion. The drain buys a child emperor and more soldiers with opinions. The barn buys a strategy of making enemies into neighbors with spears. The beach buys a war the empire almost loses. The cord buys Tang. The volley buys a republic that will have to answer other questions with other walls. You asked for raw. The raw truth is that power prefers blood to uncertainty and then lies about what the blood accomplished. Remember the floor, the steam, the dust, the smoke, the silk, the plaster. Remember the hands that did the work and the hands that looked away. And remember the simple, ugly sentence history keeps proving. When institutions decide to keep themselves, they make a body pay for it.